Hi, my name's Matt and I'd like to welcome you to this Zindiac video on managing demand and opportunities. This is part of our ITIL specialist course Drive Stakeholder Value and particularly part of the offer step of the customer journey. For services, demand and capacity are interconnected. Services cannot be stored for later use. So if you think about a service, say a travel service, a transport service on a train's running at a particular time on a particular day, and you either get on the train or you don't. If you don't, the seat's empty where you might have sat. You can't store it for later use. Value can only be co-created when supply meets demand. So if capacity is greater than demand, then we have wasted facilities and resources. So that would be empty seats on the train if that's the service we're providing. Equally, if demand is greater than capacity, then we have lost opportunity. So our train's full, which is great, but there's people left on the platform who can't get on the train because we don't have the capacity, and that's lost opportunity. Had we had a bigger train, we could have had more people on the train. And that goes for any service, whatever service, whether it's an IT service or a physical service or whatever it might be. So we're always trying to match our capacity with demand at any given point in time. So to optimise service opportunities, service providers should adjust capacity and influence demand. And again, going back to the train example, obviously train companies, what they do is they try and adjust their capacity. So at rush hour, they've got more capacity. They run more trains, maybe longer trains with more carriages. But equally, they try and influence demand and try and influence as many people as possible who don't need to travel in rush hour to travel at a different time, and they do that via various pricing mechanisms. A proper understanding of how their services are being used by different customer groups and segments is crucial. And obviously I've touched on that in terms of people who have to travel in rush hour because they're commuters and they have to be in an office by a particular time, as opposed to people, different groups of people who can choose to travel at different times. Patterns of business activity are particularly useful for understanding demand. And we produce and analyse patterns of business activity by using facts and charts through monitoring and logging, reflecting the service usage. And it enables measures to be implemented to meet peaks in demand. And all services have patterns of business activity. So some are quite dramatic, some changes in demand are really quite dramatic. In retail, the difference in demand at a weekend, so on a Saturday particularly and a Sunday, is far, far higher than Monday to Friday. It's really a dramatic increase. So Monday to Friday the shops might be really quite empty, whereas Saturday and Sunday much greater demand, so it's really quite a big difference. Other areas demand might change, like with the train service through the day rather than day to day. Others, travel industry, it's very much around school holidays, and so that's on more on a monthly basis. Others demand might change on a yearly or even greater basis, and if there's yearly events that cause demand to change for certain areas. Another pattern that can be identified is through analysing incoming calls. So the service desk, if we provide a service desk, can see the service required and can manage the demand. So again, service desk, how many people do we need on the service desk? Can we match supply to the demand? Can we have different ways of contacting the service desk? Has how people prefer to contact the service desk changed? So I think chat particularly has become much more popular. So many people, often myself included, would rather use chat facilities than actually ring up. And part of the reason is if you phone someone up as a consumer, it takes all your time. Whereas if you use chat, you can be chatting while you're watching TV or doing something else. So the overall time to resolution might be longer, but you're not totally wrapped up doing it and unable to do anything else. And obviously creating self-service solutions can really help as well where that's possible. Patterns of business activity help organisations make fact-based decisions. So by analysing the patterns of business activity, we can make decisions based on facts rather than just individual perceptions. Some service experience rapid growth, increasing capacity and impacting capacity. And if we think we're going to have dramatic growth, then we need to think about that. So do we put in the capacity at the beginning on the basis that we expect the rapid growth, or do we just make sure that we can grow our supply at a rapid rate if demand does increase? Because obviously there's a risk if you put in a great capacity and then the demand doesn't come, you've got a lot of wasted capacity. Once patterns are identified, different options will be available for adjusting and managing capacity and shaping demand. Capacity and performance management provides three perspectives: business capacity management, product and service capacity management, and component capacity management. And they're really three different layers of capacity. So the business capacity management is triggered by the customer. That's the external capacity demand, external demand. So that triggers that we have capacity within the business to meet that external demand. Products and service capacity is end-to-end capacity of given products and services, and then obviously component capacity management is down to individual components of the service. So that might be actual, in an IT environment, actual servers or network capacity or service desk personnel capacity. It's at that lower level, and we need to consider the capacity at each level. So capacity and demand must be considered to utilise resources better. Managing demand is about understanding different user profiles and influencing their behaviour. So not all users will want to use the service at the same time. Some might use it occasionally, some might use it heavily, some might use it at specific times and not other times. So we have to understand how that works out. Capacity and performance management is about sizing the capacity to respond to the actual demand. And certainly in IT, one of the things that I think has really improved or helped us is we don't have to have our own physical capacity. So I've certainly worked with organisations where they had a fairly steady demand through the year, but at certain times they could have dramatic increases, but just for a few days, and then they go back to this fairly steady demand. And buying all the capacity, owning all the capacity for their peak demand made no sense. They just couldn't afford to do that. But equally, if they only had the capacity for their regular demand, then when the peak demand came, when people really wanted to use their service, they wouldn't be able to provide the service. It'd crash or it'd just run too slowly to be usable. So what they were able to do with our help was access cloud-based capacity bases. So when the peak demand came, they could supplement their owned capacity with cloud-based capacity on, they basically lease that capacity for the few days when they needed that extra capacity. So, and that's not just in IT, that occurs in other business areas, having that temporary additional capacity. You think about retail organisations, a lot of the staff who work weekends are basically temporary staff. They only work weekends. They may be students, or people who are doing something else themselves during the week, and they just come in and work weekends. And the same is true around Christmas and other holidays. So where there's extra demand, they bring in extra people just on a part-time on part-time basis, and maybe they're doing other things during the year, but they just have that seasonal work when it's available, and then they go off and do other things with different seasons. So yeah, demand can be fixed or variable. Variable capacity helps the consumer turn fixed costs into variable. That's what that's saying is, rather than the consumer having to pay a fixed amount, maybe for their maximum usage, they can just pay according to their usage. And obviously, as a consumer, you'll probably have gone into contracts like that yourself, where you'll have thought about, do I just want to pay whatever it is, X pounds, X dollars a month for the service, and it's fixed, and I know, and sometimes I'll be under and sometimes I'll be over, or do I want a variable cost to match my variable demand? And it swings around us, and you have to make a decision about what's right for you. Often if we go over, we get charged disproportionately. You think about things like your mobile phone contract tend to work like that, where you pick a number of gigabits of data a month, whether that's 10 or 20 or 50 or 100, and obviously you pay more for more. And while you're under, you're just paying that fixed cost. But if you go over, they really hit you and ramp up the cost. So you have to kind of try and judge what's the right amount to go for. Another way of optimizing capacity is to transfer the workload to the service consumer. And again, we see more of that. So we mentioned before about having self-help, which is transferring work to the service consumer. When we buy stuff now, a lot of the manufacturing work or the assembly work is often transferred to us. So whether that's, you go and buy a wardrobe or something else from IKEA, you bring it home flat packed, and then you have to build the wardrobe. So that's the workload being transferred to you as a consumer, and that goes across many industries. You go and buy a game from Hasbro, and it comes and you've got to assemble it before you pay it the first time, because they haven't done that work, whereas they used to do that. Shaping or smoothing demand. So that's, the smoother demand, the easier it is for us as a service provider. So if we've got consistent demand, then it's much easier for us. So what can we do to smooth it? Because when it varies, it's a challenge. So failing to shape the demand to match the supply will cause a poor return on capacity investments. So we'll either, we'll have that problem before, where either we've got wasted capacity or we've got wasted opportunity. Smoothing demand to match the service capacity is therefore an important discipline. Booking services help to smooth demand. So service providers often use booking services. Indeed, my car is currently with the dealer being serviced today as I record this, and I obviously had to book it in on a particular day, and also they started sending me, as soon as I'd booked it, they sent me a confirmation, and then the next day they rang me up to make sure it was booked correctly, and then they send me reminders, and and basically what they're doing is they've booked it, but what they don't want is a no-show. And you can see on the slide, they're talking about adding a cancellation fee, definitely sending reminders, perhaps delaying the commitment on their side. So sometimes it's not a booking, until they confirm. So you're basically requesting a particular time, but then they can commit later and say, yes, you are booked in, or we're going to move you around. Ensuring that the consumer confirms their booking a day in advance. So it's that day. You're coming in tomorrow. Are you sure you're coming in tomorrow? If you need to rebook, if you need to change it, then let us know now. Restaurants do the same thing to avoid those no-shows. Service providers offer price incentives to influence customer behaviour. Yes, and you'll see this particularly in the travel industry, where they try and even out demand. So for flights, trains, whatever it might be, hire car bookings, hotels, they try and even out demand. And charge more when there's high demand so they can make more profit, but equally reduce cost when there's low demand to try to stimulate demand, to try to make sure they're full. And in the ITIL guidance, it refers to yield management for that process. I've done quite a lot of this, and I've always referred to it as revenue management, so revenue or yield management. And what they're trying to do is optimize capacity and ultimately profit for them. So if you've got a hotel with 100 rooms and only 50 of them are occupied, you've got wasted capacity. You're still paying for them, you're still paying the rent and rates and so on, staff for those rooms. So that's bringing your profits down. You want to fill them. So, and to a certain extent, with things like that, it's almost any money we can get for that room is better than no money. So having somebody in that room, and even if we don't, obviously there's cleaning costs and so on, but almost if you get somebody in the hotel, then they might have dinner in the hotel, they might take other hotel services. So you have to look at that as well. And whatever your service is, quite often that's the case, is if you offer services at a low cost, maybe even just breaking even, the service consumer might buy other services that you then make the profit on. And quite a lot of businesses have that sort of model. And it's based on historical data, so it's very much based on, so for the hotel example, it's based on, right, so today on the 22nd of October, historically over the last 5, 10, 15, 20, maybe 100 years, however much data we've got, how many rooms had we sold for the 1st of December? And based on having sold that number of rooms on the 22nd of October for the 1st of December, when it got to the 1st of December, were we full or not? And from that, some very clever mathematics is used to work out and say, okay, we're ahead of schedule or we're behind schedule. It's a little like your sat nav might work in your car when it's predicting your arrival at your destination. It said, okay, we thought the journey was going to be 3 hours, but we're halfway into the journey. It's taken 2 hours, so our revised estimate for arrival time is, and it's working out based on data what time it thinks it's going to arrive. And that's what yield management systems refer to doing, is saying, based on all the data we've got today, we're making a prediction about the future and therefore adjusting price and maybe other things as well. It doesn't necessarily just have to be price, obviously. There are other incentives you can use. Differential charging and yield management are examples of using pricing and charging mechanisms for managing capacity and demand. They can drive consumer behaviour in many aspects, and it's a powerful tool that should be used consciously to drive the right behaviour. And that's an important word, that consciously. Generally in business, in service management, what we want to be doing is making conscious decisions. So not just kind of letting stuff happen, but making conscious decisions and then reviewing those decisions to try and improve over time. There can be adverse side effects of using charging as a demand management mechanism. Yeah, so remember, all systems can be gamed, and if the consumer starts to understand that you're varying price to manage demand, they will adjust their behaviour accordingly. So, very simple example, when I buy wine from the supermarket, they discount certain wines. And I know, so I have a favourite, quite a particular Rioja that I really quite like, but I only ever buy it when it's discounted, because I don't see the discounted price as a discounted price. I see that as the price, because I know it's regularly, and I mean every other week, is discounted to that price. So I know I can buy it for that price. If I go in and want to buy some wine, and it's not that price, it's what they're terming the regular price, I don't view it as the regular price. I just say, that's just an excessive price. There's no way I'm ever paying that higher price for that bottle of wine, because I know you're going to discount it next week. So this week, all right, you're not discounting it right now. I want some wine right now. I'll buy a different one that's discounted. And one of my nephews sells wine, and he absolutely says that is incredibly common, that many, the vast majority of people who buy wine only buy it when it's discounted because they know it's going to be discounted. So all systems can be gamed, so you do need to think about how it will affect customer behaviour and maybe adjust for that. Pricing and charging mechanisms should be assessed and evaluated frequently for that reason. And the questions to ask: are the mechanisms driving behaviour that optimises value, both for the service provider but also the consumer? So do they allow for a win-win? And are there incentives for both parties to drive service improvements? So when we talk about service improvement opportunities, service quality depends on the management of improvement opportunities. Conflicting requests from customers, poor pricing incentives, or a lack of dedicated improvement budget could be sources of conflict. So certainly, obviously, the conflicting requirement from customers, I want this, different customer wants something else that conflicts, then who do we keep happy and who do we upset? But also, if we don't have that dedicated improvement budget, and you can see on the slide, continual improvement requires ownership, but also a service improvement budget. So it is ITIL guidance and recommendation that you have a dedicated service improvement budget, rather like having a dedicated cybersecurity budget, to make sure it happens that if you kind of don't have that dedicated budget, it might not happen. It's one of those things that people say, well, if we don't spend that money today, I won't have a problem tomorrow. It's the problems medium to long term is when it's going to come. So it's tempting, if you've got issues now, to not do the improvement. So that's why it's important to have a improvement budget and a transparent process. And I've talked about this, so not just internally. So yes, internally, but not just internally, but externally. So if we're asking for feedback from the consumer, which we absolutely should be, then when we get their feedback and they make suggestions, it's not enough just to say thank you very much. You need to go back to them and close the loop and say either thank you for your suggestion, we are going to implement it and you can expect to see it by whenever, or thank you for your suggestion, unfortunately we are unable to, or we're not going to implement it because, give them a very good reason, but thank you for suggestion. We will review. Maybe we will review it at an appropriate future point in time. But you must make it transparent that you're not. If you just say thank you, and you don't do it, they'll think you're ignoring them, and then they'll be far less likely to give you ideas in the future. Improvement opportunities can come from a wide range of sources, and there's a big list there that you can obviously read for yourself. The object is to gather facts about a service, how a service facilitates value for stakeholders. So this is an aspect of value-driven and data-driven insights, and what we're looking for is lots of data. And personally, what I like is, if you can, at every touch point, or as many touch points as possible with the consumer, just ask them, are they happy or not? So kind of a thumbs up or a thumbs down at every touch point would be ideal, because then you get lots and lots of data, and that gives you better insight than if you only ask them occasionally and ask them lots of questions. If you just happen to hit them when they're unhappy, as Vodafone did with me yesterday. So I was trying to get information about an upgrade on my phone, and basically the site doesn't work. It's just rubbish. So I just became frustrated, and then when I'd finished, they asked me for feedback. So I just rubbish 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and it's really other bits of their service are okay, but just that particular bit wasn't working. I was frustrated, so I gave them. But that can distort it. Whereas if they're just asking me a binary up or down, yes, they would have got a down, but it's just one down, and presumably other people it's working for them. I don't know why it doesn't work for me, but it doesn't distort. One person can't distort it as much if you get lots of data. So the final thing we're going to look at is building business cases. So first of all, the customer and then the supplier. So building the customer business case. And it is important as a supplier that we understand the customer business case. And so it's a key part of the sales process is understanding the customer business case in terms of they're going to buy the service from us. What is the benefit? Obviously, what is the value they are going to get from it? What outcomes are we enabling, and what costs and risks are we taking away from them, so that we can show them and they know that it's a positive business case. So the core of a business case is that financial evaluation. Yeah, we're asking you to pay us £1 million a year, but you are going to save £2 million a year, and here we can show you that. And we're taking risks off you and whatever other benefit. We're improving the service. You're getting a better service for that as well. So the analysis should consider both qualitative and quantitative aspects. A positive business case indicates that the expected benefits exceed the expected expenditures and risks. So obviously, as expected, there's always risk. There's always an amount of uncertainty, but we're trying to put as much certainty in there as we can. A service business case should ideally cover all the areas of a full service, from service consumer purposes to products and resources. It should include all relevant benefits, costs and risks. The purpose of the business case is to establish a foundation, again, for informed, conscious decision making, but it is based on some assumptions. And assumptions, as I said before, is just uncertainty, it's risk. So you reduce risk by bringing certainty to the assumption. So you either, as soon as you can, confirm or deny that the assumption was correct and adjust as appropriate. Different perspectives affect the business analyst's ability to prioritise the consumer requirements. The main questions to be covered in a business case include, and we've got a big long list of questions on the slide. I won't read all of them out, but I will just talk about two. So what will be the total cost of ownership? So it is important to look at the total cost of ownership. So certainly, hopefully not anymore, but when organisations started moving towards cloud-based services, I saw several forget about the network costs. So they'd kind of look at the cost of hosting the service themselves, of buying the servers and running it and managing it themselves, and they looked at the cost of the cloud-based service and said, oh, we're going to save lots of money because it's so much lower. But what they forgot was that if they're hosting it themselves in their own data center and they're accessing it maybe over their own LAN, local area network, they get a certain level of performance. To get the same level of performance of a cloud-based service over a WAN, over the internet, they're going to have a pretty decent internet connection. Now, the cost of internet connections have come down dramatically, but certainly a few years ago, that made a big difference in terms of the total cost of ownership. So we do need to look at the total cost of ownership. What else are we paying for? And also, what happens at the end of the contract? So maybe we're signing for 5 years or 10. What happens at the end of contract, and how tied in are we? Are we going to be able to change it through the contract? What is the expected return on investment or net present value? So return on investment is very much, it's a percentage. So we're investing £10 million today, and we are going to save £20 million. So the benefit is net £10 million on a £10 million investment. So that's 100% return on investment. The investment's 10, and our net benefit is 10 because we've saved 20, so that's 100%. Or if we were investing £5 million and that was going to increase our sales from 10 million to 20, so that's a £10 million increase in sales. The benefit's 10 million, it's cost us 5 million, that's a 200% return on investment. So it's a a percentage figure. The net present value is if we've got £10 million of benefit in 10 years' time, what is that worth today? Because £10 million in 10 years' time isn't £10 million today, it's less. So to give you an idea, $1 in the year 2000 had the same buying power as 1 cent in 1900. So that's obviously over 100 years, but generally over history, the value of currency has declined over time. So that's what net present value is looking at, and just saying, well, particularly maybe looking at costs and benefits, but in today's money, so we're comparing apples with apples. Building the service provider business case. So as service provider, that's our business case. So do we actually want to provide this service? Are we going to make money from this service? And we need to consider the customer's business cases. So we've just looked at that. We need to make sure that when we're creating our business case, the customer, we're providing value to the customer, or they're not going to buy from us. And it's important to identify how the service fits into the existing and future portfolio of services. So, as I said, that's part of the risk mitigation. So is this service our kind of carrot to get new customers? So we're not making much money on it, but it's bringing new customers in who we will then sell other more profitable services to? Or is this the other more profitable service? So we've got other services that are bringing customers in, but from this service is the one where we really want to make our money on this particular service. So that's where you've got to consider all services in that more holistic portfolio level view. A service, we know what a service is. It's a means of creating value co-creation by facilitating outcomes that customers want to achieve without customer having to manage specific costs and risks. Risks are transferred to the service provider as part of the service. So are we happy to take those risks? Are we happy about the risks that are being transferred to us? The service provider needs to understand the cost of providing a service. It needs to have a cost model that considers all the resources required. Yes, and the broader the service, the less risk to us in the cost model. And what I mean by that is when I provided a managed service, which is servers, network, desktop, security, all IT. Yeah, we're doing the whole of your IT, and you'll pay us £10 million a year and we'll provide all your IT, Mr. Customer. Great. I know when I'm creating that cost model that A, it'll be wrong, but B, I'll kind of, the estimates, some estimates will be under and some estimates will be over, but across the whole, that wide service, it'll even out and we'll make a profit and we'll provide good service to the customer, and hopefully everybody's happy. But what's happened over time, and particularly if the customer has adopted SIAM, so service integration and management, where they're having a service supplier and a network supplier and a desktop supplier and a security supplier, and maybe even splitting it more than that, then because I'm just focused on a narrow band of services, I've got less service to spread my risk across. So the estimates are more important, if you like. They have a bigger effect if they're wrong. Now, it might be in those instances that actually what I do is I spread my risk across many contracts. So rather than kind of worrying about, well, is that contract right? What I'm saying is, well, actually, I've got 1,000 contracts. So some contracts I'll make money on, some contracts I'll lose money on. And if you think about things like banks with mortgages, they have thousands of mortgages, they make money on most of them, but some they'll lose money on. Same with insurance companies, so the insurance on your car, if you never make a claim, then they're making lots of money, but if you make a claim, they might lose lots of money. So they might view it like that, but do think about the cost model in those terms as to how we as a service provider manage our risk, and a basic risk management strategy is to distribute your risk, balance your risk over many items. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this video, and I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you found it useful. Please join me in the next one. Until you see me again, have a great day.